add lots. I'm going to hand over now to Bea and Reena, but I'm here if you need me, just shout. Okay, enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks so much for the introduction. And thank you everyone for joining us for World Refugee Day 2023. We're so excited to have you here and share with us our tips and experiences. We hope that will help you about empowering refugees through English language teaching. And so, I'm Bea, and this is my colleague Reena. Thank you, Melissa, for the introduction earlier.
Great. So in today's session, we are going to be talking about the situation of refugees and asylum seekers in Hong Kong. We are going to be looking at the key considerations for teaching from our own experience. We're going to be looking into cross-cultural competence advice for research, also looking into trauma-informed education guidelines. And then we would be showing you some of our achievements like creative competition highlights and children book reading. And then there'll be time for question and answer.
But please do feel free to use the chat throughout if you want to ask any questions. We'll check it from time to time.
So here, as you all, or if you're not aware, Hong Kong has not signed the Geneva Convention, which is related to refugee status, which means that Hong Kong will not officially take in refugees. So here are some of the challenges that are faced by Hong Kong refugees and asylum-seeking community. Right. So about 13,000 protection claimants are there in Hong Kong, and only 1% get a substantiated case in Hong Kong. So in total, there are about 67 global cases which are approved, and out of which 38% are approved in Europe. And as you all must be aware, Hong Kong is one of the most expensive cities in the world, but the refugee community get only 1,500 Hong Kong dollars per month per adult for rent, and half of that for the child. And they get 1,200 Hong Kong dollars per person for food and food vouchers, so which comes down to $40 a day. And about between 200 and 300 in cash per month for transport. And then education. So in Hong Kong, the kindergarten education is not mandatory. So this becomes even more difficult for refugee children who are under 6 or 6 to go to the school. And then only 44 out of 108 applicants get paid work approved. And then there is a lot of discrimination and stigma. So for example, on transport, many of us students told us that when they're sitting next to people would just walk away because they're refugees, or people would cover their nose and their mouth, thinking that they stink, which is very, very sad. So all these challenges got really worse during COVID-19, which is why our work with different charities, which we will unfold during the session, became really, really important. Our partner charity is Christian Action Center for Refugees. We've been working together with them since 2008, and some of our past highlights include organizing basically public fundraising events through showcasing our work, students' work, for example, Dignity Through Art, Connecting Through Education Art. And then we went to a conference, British Council Inclusion, Mobility and Multilingual Conference in Bangkok, where we were able to raise awareness of people related to the situations of refugees and asylum seekers, especially in Hong Kong, but we also gave a global overview. And we try to hold puppet shows for children. We try to organize different events for children. So for example, hosting puppet show for International Children's Day, which is on the 20th of November. So this year we had partnered with British Consulate and we held the puppet show there. So here are some of our key considerations for teaching refugees and asylum-seeking communities in Hong Kong. So both B and I will share our perspective related to early years teaching and adult teaching. So the first one is sense of belonging. So as I mentioned, kindergarten education is not mandatory in Hong Kong. So for these children, when they come to the British Council is their school. They call it, it is my school. It's a safe and welcoming space for them. So we try to give them British Council branded school bags, or we try to give them, maybe make name badges with them. We keep them in the same classroom so that they have that belonging, that this is for me and this is my school.
And you mentioned how we would give them branded things as well. Yeah, so for adults, we would have branded bags and folders, notebooks and pens. We kind of work with different departments, for example, exams, and see what stock they have to share with our students. So they really can relate to having the British Council student identity. And
yeah, and also, like, for example, when they walk into the building, then for them it is like, I am going to my school, this is my school, and they're very, very proud. You can see that they feel that they belong to the British Council, which is a very nice feeling for us as teachers, for their parents, and for them to feel safe.
And so part of relating to British Council student identity is trying to integrate them within our regular student community. So for example, for adult students, we've tried to integrate them into regular classes like IELTS workshops, but also our offering, which I'm not sure if some of you in other British councils have, the My Club, which is more like a social class that's quite casual, and they can interact with people from not just Hong Kong, but different countries, and talk about things like hobbies, things they like, places they want to go in Hong Kong. So by doing this, they just get to interact on a more human level. And yeah, maybe it's the first time that they're meeting these people from different countries. So it's a really beautiful experience, and we're going to share feedback from that a bit later on.
So for us, it's been, like I mentioned, we try to give them a real school feeling. So we celebrate different international days. So for example, Children's Day, we organize a puppet show for them. We invite teachers, and, you know, we try to organize it. So this year, like I mentioned before, it was organized at the British Consulate. We've also started giving them places in our regular summer school programs so that they're able to meet other children from Hong Kong. And we've had a very, very positive feedback from teachers and from students. We've also we try to organize parents training, which is normally done. We've had like volunteers from Center for Refugees. So they come in, and while the kids are in the classroom with us, they train the parents. And the main thing is basically because their lives are so overwhelming that it's basically to give relaxing techniques to parents, dealing with stress, also engaging with their children, and then, you know, also doing some craft activities. So we plan around that throughout the year. Structures and routines. So we try to have the same routines with them as we would with any regular class. So they come in, they have to queue up outside the class, they have to tidy up the classroom like other children when they've finished work. And this also involves tidying up their bags. They have to ask going to the toilet, which is a little thing, but it's a big thing for a 3 or a 4 years old. We make them aware of different international days. We also try to have like a birthday party at the end of the month. So there, you know, most of the time we would just order some food and give cards, and so that they really feel that there is a structure and there is a routine and they get used to it.
Yeah, I think it's super important when they've had such unstructured or disrupted life. So for the adult courses, we really try to give them the timetable ahead in advance so that they can see all the dates and plan their time. But we also need to give them regular reminders of this, even on the day or day before. Even if we've sent them the calendar, they may forget and get overwhelmed with other appointments or things going on, things that they're thinking about. And so it's not just about timetabling and having that kind of commitment throughout the year with the same teacher, but that structure and routine also comes into the way that you do your class. So are you giving instructions and feedback in the same kind of way? Are you having consistent presentation style in terms of like the materials that you're using and things like that? So just so that they get used to being around you and being in the classroom. Some of them have been out of education for years. Just to give some perspective, the longest person that the person who's been here longest that I know who hasn't been able to go anywhere is 20 years. So that's 20 years without work. So you can see how structure and routine is super, super important for students like these. Yeah, it can take a really long time for them to get anywhere else. So yeah, I think reminding them of this is really important and having that constant communication, which leads into the next part, which is, yeah, very clear and consistent and constant communication. So with the charity and with the students. So from the adult side, we give them the choice of joining a WhatsApp group with a teacher. We wouldn't always do this with our regular classes, but I do think it's important for that kind of consistency with the teacher. But with having clear boundaries on what that WhatsApp group is used for. Reena will also touch on that later. And then also in terms of feedback. So generally, you know, you want to kind of consider the impact your comments are having. So while in a regular class, maybe I would kind of give corrections without really thinking about it too much. Like here, I would really try to be very sensitive in my feedback methods and really prioritize what they need to hear, because obviously they've gone through a lot of negative things. So we really want to be lifting them up. So I'll be focusing on any positive contribution in that class. If they found it difficult to contribute that day in terms of work, I'll compliment them for showing up, for trying, or for partaking in discussion, even if they didn't write anything. So yeah, kind of being flexible with your feedback, but trying to find positive things here and there I think is really important. And yeah, praising their social skills and engagement and little things that, yeah, maybe we take for granted and maybe our regular students like show with ease, but yeah, for these students, it can mean a lot.
Yeah, for us, it's been talking to the parents often before and after the class. It could be, you know, or if parent has an issue, we could always address it. Either they could come early before the lesson, or they could join, we could wait with them after the lesson. We also try to give them a parent's letter, which covers what they did in class, and then, you know, suggestions to improve, or how parents could engage with them in the classroom, or what could be done with them at home. Like we said, we do have WhatsApp group with the parents, but also she mentioned we need to keep the professional boundaries, because most of the asylum seekers in Hong Kong do not have any routine. And they're very flexible with their times, which I think we will explain later in the sessions. So you have to be very, very mindful that, no, I will not answer your message at 10 o'clock in the evening. Just also teaching them that it doesn't work like that. You have to respect the working hours of a teacher. And we often do that by telling them at the beginning, or even like we remind them, oh, we send you a message. And I mean, I have had incident where like I was helping children to enroll in summer school, and then I had parents messaging me at 11 o'clock at night, and then I didn't want to reply to that message and wait until the next day. And after every 2 minutes, there were like question marks, like answer my message. And then I got a call at 7 o'clock in the morning saying, oh, you know, so you have to be really firm on those things and say, no, I will answer. These are my working hours. It's also in a way making them aware of boundaries. As far as feedback is concerned, I think, like we said, we give them a very encouraging, very positive feedback whenever they do something good, or their interaction, their social skills. However, with the early years classes, we have to be very, very mindful about the negative consequences that the feedback can lead to for children, simply because the parents are so overwhelmed. So if they hear anything that it could be any little thing, like the child was naughty, then they would just come up to, like, you know, they would start belittling the child or try to give child the inferiority complex because they want the child to be the best. But giving feedback or explaining what the child can work on doesn't mean that the child is not good. As far as children are concerned, I mean, we always try to be natural and firm and encouraging. But again, we are very, very mindful of the fact that children can be very manipulative and they can take advantage as soon as they have an opportunity. Every child in the world is like that. And that brings us to the attendance, which has been one of our major.
But before we go to that, it just reminded me. So I think, you know, like you were mentioning, kids might really want your attention and yeah, try to get that. But I think like adults as well, because they're so isolated in their regular lives. So when they have the chance, they really want to keep talking to you, and maybe that they'll see that as that chance that they have to interact with someone. So again, like kind of being firm on the structure or routine of the class. But also, as you mentioned, like having boundaries when you say no to requests. I think one thing is because they do hear a no a lot in their lives, is just to really give like really clear, transparent reasons why you can't accommodate requests. And you know, as you mentioned, that because of the disruption in their lives, maybe sometimes they forget, you know, the impact of their request, like might involve, you know, changing things around for lots of different people. And so in that case, you really need to make it clear, like, yeah, you know, this is what has happened, and yeah, we're not able to like accommodate this request because of XYZ. So yeah, validating their concern, but also yeah, giving
them very logical reasoning, and giving them reasoning in very short and concise words. This is it. I cannot do this because of A, B, and C. You know, and then they get it. They will still come back. I mean, they still insist and come back, but then in the end, the point goes through. Yes, this has been one of our major challenge. But for early years, for example, we do the parents training at the beginning of every semester to explain it to the parents how the attendance can affect their child's progress. This is very, very important simply because they have such an overwhelming situation and disrupted lives that, you know, and there's no regular routine. The parents don't have jobs, the kids don't have school, so there is no waking up hours. They sleep up at odd times, they wake up at odd times. So it's like they forget that they have to go for a class. And there were many occasions I was pleasantly surprised when the parent came up, oh, I forgot about the class, but you know, my child remembered that they had a class. And also there is this whole thing, you know, they don't want to feel left out. So what they do is also any activities that are available to them, for example, through, let's say, Center for Refugees, they would just quickly sign up. They would register their children for those activities without realizing that their child might have English lesson at the same time, which is like, and then they're struggling. Oh, if I take my child for the craft class or sport class or English lesson, and that just gets completely, the whole thing gets very blurred for them. But at the same time, in their minds, I think they think it's the best for my child to do as many things as possible and what is available, right? Because not many opportunities are available to them. So what about adults, B?
Yeah, it's also been an ongoing challenge. Even just with the classes that the charity set up, that's not with us. I heard that they had a sort of like one chance policy. So if they didn't give a reason for not showing up like one time, then they were out of that particular class. And so I was like, oh, that sounds a bit harsh. Why don't we try 3? And then we kind of compromised on 2. So to try and encourage them to give reasons if they're not able to attend class, and just showing that it's okay to make those changes. We understand you have a lot on your plate, but again, because the impact is on several people involved, like just to let us know in advance and just kind of encourage them just having that communication with us, and yeah, taking responsibility from that kind of side. It might not be something that they're aware of when they're so overwhelmed and in that moment with all the things that they're dealing with, but yeah, it's something that I think is really important to highlight. And the next point is lesson planning and content adaptation. So because of varied and fluctuating attendance rates, one thing we found useful was to kind of plan classes that are more standalone, rather than having one class depend on needing to attend another. And because, yeah, it's been really hard to get people consistently attending all the time. So that's one thing in terms of planning like an overall course. But the second thing would be to think very carefully about the content that's involved. So of course, it's okay to take material that you might use with your regular students, but think about what topics could potentially be triggering. So for example, someone new to the program was going to help us out with one class, and they thought, oh, what about this class with money? And I was like, well, they don't have money, and you can see the collocations there are, yeah, go to an ATM and use your credit card. And yeah, that's something that we don't want to remind them of. We don't want to keep, emphasizing their hardships. So similarly, if you have a conversation about travel, or where would you like to go one day, they're stuck in a limbo and don't know when the situation will end. So it's not really the best thing to be thinking about, I would say. So yeah, just kind of thinking about things that are kind of safer topics, particularly for students who are newer to the class. And then for you?
For us, it's been mainly, so we follow a general early years. We adapt with what is done with early years at the British Council. So they come in, they play for a while, which also teaches them other skills like sharing with each other. Then we start with songs and storytelling. Stories are generally around EDI and motivating stories. And then they have a little, either a phonics lesson and the usual kindergarten class lesson. But we always try to add a motor skills activity there, because when they go for an interview, I mean, children in Hong Kong, when they turn 6 to get into primary 1, they have to go through an interview, and motor skills is one of the very important part that is tested. So we try to work on their motor skills. They also have, and then in the end, we end up the lesson with, so we did a book and a toy drive, and we got lots of donations from our regular students. And so we kept that and we put it into, we gave them little library and the toy card. So they can come, they can borrow a book and a toy, go back home and then bring it back. Just all this is just leading to a real life school experience. And yeah, I mean, most of it is around the things that we do with our kindergarten classes, so that they are not, when they go and they join primary school in primary 1, they do not feel lost and they're not like, oh, what is this? Right? And obviously lesson planning is related to homework assignings. So for us, that's a good question, right? So homework is very easy, very simple. It goes around coloring, counting, the ways parents can engage with their children. So like I mentioned before, they have a library card and a toy card. So sometimes we try to do activities like show and tell. They could go, they could talk to their parents, look into, bring back the toy, talk about it to the rest of the class. Or we would give them some materials for the craft so that they can sit at home and do some craft activity with their parents. So it just depends on what skills we are working on. And mainly for early years, the homework task is getting parents engaged in their daily lives and in their learning. What about you? How does it work for you?
Yeah, like it is, as we mentioned, hard in terms of attendance and motivation, with all the things going on for them to necessarily complete homework. But I still think it's a good option to have, but not have the next lesson relying on having completed it. So I try to give them short and simple options, some online resources that they could use on their phone, or we also had like a library box where they could borrow books and read, or a simple task like a discussion task that they could use with someone that they know, or a short written task, giving them options, giving them flexibility. But yeah, not necessarily relying on having them do it for the next lesson. And one thing to bear in mind, depending on your context, is varied student online accessibility. So can they even access those online resources? Because when we had to go online during COVID, for the adults, not everyone had a device, or some who did, they might not have wanted to share their background, their setup, so their video was off. It was hard to get them to engage. I remember one of them, he's one of the few who were allowed to work in Hong Kong, but he was taking like a class like on his work break. So he was in a storeroom, and yeah, that wasn't the best setup for his learning. So things like that to consider. Yeah, it's kind of thinking, is it really worth going ahead? Maybe just taking a short break and assigning them other options that they could have for continuing practice, which may not necessarily mean having an online class. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, for us, I mean, online has been really during COVID times. So when COVID started and we started our regular classes, so initially it was one-to-one. So we kind of organized a computer donation at the British Council Hong Kong, and we received a very positive response from lots of people who came and donated their computers. But unfortunately, we could only give the computers to our young learners, one, because of one-to-one lessons. And secondly, the early years classes went longer online in Hong Kong compared to the adult classes. So we went online, and for that, I had to do a Zoom session with the parents before we started the lesson. One, to test if the machine was working fine. And second was basically giving them all kind of guidelines about how we're going to run the class, what's going to happen, how they're going to join, train them about Zoom and the processes involved, and child security, child safety, children protection and safeguarding was very, very important. But we still had, like we said, we did have problems because, I mean, in any ways in Hong Kong, the flats are very, very small, but even smaller for these people. So there was no space for us to do like brain breaks or activities, like dancing or singing songs or, which made them very motivated. So I think maybe it was better for us to take a little break at that time and then restart when they could come back into the center. And yeah, so basically before COVID, we had quite a few teachers involved, but things got really tough, and everybody went online, different routines, so many things to learn, which was global, and we were all into it. And so because of longer screen time, the number of teachers who volunteered became really less. So we had to kind of change the way we would run these classes. So instead of having them, let's say, every week, we said, okay, we'll have them every alternate weeks, or we would organize events like Children's Day and stuff online, and where obviously we had the opportunity. The positive side of this was we had the opportunity to involve even our regular students. So all children could celebrate Children's Day, and just not the refugee children. But it was tough, and yeah, students' motivation and teachers, the numbers really went down, but we are picking up slowly now.
Yeah, it was definitely challenging during COVID. So when I took over as the coordinator, the previous model of people kind of sharing a class with someone and volunteering every 2 weeks so that there was a weekly class, wasn't viable anymore. So we had teachers volunteer once a month, and then that if they shared with someone else, a class could be going on every 2 weeks. It wasn't ideal, but at least there was some consistency and continuity going. But luckily, yeah, it's been picking up. But yeah, I think that being really mindful of people's time and is something that we should all consider when working with this group. So yeah, I know some people who kind of do it for like a term or a year and then take a break and then come back to it. So yeah, kind of thinking of ways to sustain that. But a lot of teachers say, even though they have to plan a lesson, once they're in the class, they feel it's a really rewarding experience. And you kind of forget about all that. So yes, the hardest thing is getting them in the class. That's the first thing. And so to move to our next section, I see we've got questions and answers kind of regarding this about multiculturalism and kind of discrimination. So one thing I want to kind of highlight is that we should be mindful of this in ourselves, but also in our students, the concepts of cultural encapsulation and ethnocentrism. So sorry, some very psychological terms there. So cultural encapsulation is when people are unaware of how their background and upbringing and experiences have informed their worldviews. So it's more of like a passive, I don't want to say the word ignorance, but kind of, yeah, not really knowing, kind of being oblivious to that. Whereas ethnocentrism is more active and thinking that your way is kind of better or right. So, of course, when people haven't had much exposure to people from different countries, perhaps they might be more willingly like defending their point of view. But we just kind of need to model this as teachers, that we're going to be open and we're going to be curious about everyone, no matter what their background is or what their beliefs are. And through doing that, we can really encourage this in our students. And so this really starts with being self-aware and also being aware of cultural differences and other differences that may be affecting our students in the classroom. So our next section will cover this. And so I want to introduce the Culture Map, which is a book by Erin Mayer, who studied business, differences in business communication around the world. And she came up with kind of 8 scales of variation of how cultures can differ in terms of things like communication, feedback, and scheduling, which we've touched upon. And so while she's sort of placed countries on a scale, of course, there's individual variation. And with people moving around the world or having multicultural families, you may not necessarily identify with where your country is, but we kind of invite you to look at each scale and type in the chat, where do you think you are? Just as a kind of self-reflection awareness activity. So the first one is, are you a low context or high context communicator? So I'm very much a low context communicator coming from New Zealand. And so that means that I prefer to be direct, to the point. There's no hidden messages, nothing in between the lines. But some of my colleagues who I've worked with, or some of my students, they prefer to be less direct with things. And so I kind of have to be more attuned to what they're saying. So yeah, take a look at the chart and put in the chat, where do you think you are?
Hi, B and Reena, just to know that you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to move on to the next slide. Yeah. Just mindful of time. So the next one is kind of related also to low context, high context, is what kind of feedback do you prefer? Do you prefer direct feedback or indirect feedback? So some cultures apparently differ in this, in terms of whether they prefer direct positive or negative feedback. It could be different for each one. But again, where do you think you are? It was great to see, yeah, such variation. So the thing to bear in mind with this is, if you are a direct feedback giver, be mindful that the feedback can come across much stronger to someone who is an indirect feedback receiver. And then vice versa, if someone is coming from an indirect feedback giving stance, you might not take that feedback on, or yeah, there may be some misunderstanding. So this is kind of an exercise for us to just reflect on, yeah, how we might differ in terms of communication and perception. And we have one more, which we kind of touched upon, is one of our biggest challenges, which is scheduling. So for example, one time I had pretty much all the students of an IELTS class turn up late, and I was like, what happened? And they were like, oh, we're on Africa time. And I was like, that's cool, but I'm on Hong Kong time and I've got somewhere to go after this. So yeah, they were coming from a more flexible perception of time, whereas I'm definitely following linear time. Oh, and I can see someone has shared a link where you can place yourself on the culture map scales and others. Thank you for sharing so much for that. That's on the HBR website, yes. And you can also read more about the culture map. There's a summary where we've got these scales from a Solid Business Insider article. Thanks for sharing that. And again, we see a huge range. So some people have linear and some people have a flexible view of time. So again, we've seen people all across the scales. So that's really showing how diverse we all are. But one thing I really want to highlight is that there will always be individual variation. So while we can observe patterns or trends, we cannot generalize one tendency to everyone all the time. So for example, I do have refugee students who are even more on time than us. They're there 30 minutes before class thinking, where's the teacher? Is there class today? And I'm like, yes, don't worry, they'll be there on the dot. So yeah, people can vary based on their own experiences, or maybe they really want to work on this, or yeah, they kind of overcompensate. So yeah, just be very mindful that yeah, we can't generalize all the time, but this can give us some awareness as to those differences. And so to build on this is a model that again, I learned in my psychology course. So yeah, sorry to be a bit technical, but hopefully this acronym can help remind us of all the different things that can make up our identity and things that we can be aware of in terms of how our students might be showing up in the classroom. So the R stands for religious and spiritual identities. So I do encourage discussion of this topic at a higher level for adult students at, for example, upper intermediate or advanced. I think one thing that you can do to kind of model acceptance in the classroom is to be open and curious yourself. And so really try to explore, you know, what people think, what people feel, and then try to find similarities between them. So, okay, I may not believe in the same thing as you, but I do similar things, or I respect, you know, this concept in this way, or do this with my family in this way, and you can find some common ground between people. So I think that's something that you can do and you can model. And it's really important to have those discussions, because let's say that you're not religious, you can appear kind of, you might, by not asking those questions, you can kind of be appearing like dismissive of what may be very important to someone. We've touched upon economic backgrounds and how they might vary. And also in terms of sexual and gender identities. So this might be something that students could be exploring, but might not feel ready to do so if they come from a conservative culture. Conversely, if they're interacting with students or teachers with different identities from them, that might be the first time that they're meeting people who have a different background. So again, fostering that and modeling that acceptance with everyone is very important. And yeah, just saying that at the end of the day, we're all human and we all have similar things, and kind of focusing more on that than on differences, and that can kind of get them to see you as a human being rather than someone very different to them. So psychological maturity can obviously be affected by having gone through trauma. So perhaps people's ability to self-regulate, be calm and in control in the class, could be affected by what they've gone through. And so you see this with young children, right? In terms of,
so yeah, so with young children, you know, they always have that anxiety. They have, they're worried that their parents might not come back, or towards other children. Sometimes there's a lot of aggression. So how we deal with it is, I have a reflection chair where I ask them, okay, you need to sit down. This is not a punishment chair, and let's think why you're feeling like this. And we've had a lot of progress doing these little activities with them.
As we've mentioned, people's ethnic, cultural, and racial identity can inform their beliefs and viewpoints. So be curious about that. Chronological development and challenges means thinking about where in the lifespan your student is and kind of what typical milestones they might be expected to have achieved in their culture. So for example, if they're expected to get married and have kids by a certain age, but they haven't been able to do that, how does that making them feel? Or if they're an older student, are they thinking about health? Are they concerned about that? Could that be affecting how they show up in the class? And of course, with children, you can get those issues as well.
We have all of those issues as well.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, the effects of trauma and other threats to well-being. So maybe this is why they're having low concentration in the class. They're having flashbacks. They're having intrusive thoughts. They're not feeling able to focus that day. Maybe they didn't sleep. I had one student tell me, I suffer from chronic insomnia and I'm on medication right now. He just said that out in front of a class. And yeah, we need to be respectful and understanding of all these different things that they could be going through. Considering family history and dynamics. So are they in this country with their family, or have they been separated? If they are together with their family in those small enclosed spaces, how well are they getting along? It must be stressful to not have like a lot of room. So again, things like that could be adding to stress that is compounding what they're experiencing in the class. Of course, people's unique characteristics. So how do they feel about writing, reading, speaking, listening? What things do they enjoy or not like? This would also impact how you plan classes, how you deliver them. And as well as that, where they're living in the city, do they have to travel far that day? And also their language differences. So how similar or different is their local language to English? Because the greater the difference, the more challenging it's going to be, the more cognitively overloaded it will be. So these are all things to consider when planning a lesson. Of course, it's hard to consider all of these all the time, but it's good to kind of revisit this list and if you want to plan more inclusive teaching for all different student needs. And so one thing I really also want to highlight as well, and we've put the link to this activity on our post-webinar content. And I think it's a really insightful activity that anyone can do, but it's not necessarily a comfortable activity. So this is a wheel of power and privilege for us to consider the different aspects of our identity where we may have privilege over others. And this is really important to be aware of, because we always need to be mindful of how we may be, even unconsciously, subconsciously, conveying a power over dynamic. And with students who are consistently facing this issue from systems that are telling them no, this is something we really need to be careful of, because students will remember what we say for a very long time. So one example I'd like to highlight to illustrate this is one student I did a level testing with a couple of weeks ago. Told me, oh, when I had a level testing a few years ago, the native English teacher turned to the interpreter and said, no, his English isn't very good. Let's put him in beginner class. And he said, this really affected my confidence. And I didn't come back, for a while after that. And I was so surprised, because this student, he was speaking really confidently. He was using great vocabulary, talking about the scenery in Hong Kong, discussing his religion. And I thought, well, that's really strange. But this comment really stuck with him. And these passing comments that we can make can have double impact the more privileged that you are and the more distance there is from you and your students. So do really consider this and take time after the webinar to do reflection on where you are in this chart. But more importantly, also try to find things in common. So no matter what differences you have, what similarities do you have? Do you like the same things to eat, the activities you do? Or can you show curiosity in learning about the other person and why they like or dislike something? And what is a shared activity that you can do together? These are all things that can help to bridge that gap. So it's about awareness, but also about building bridges between you. Okay. And so to kind of summarize what we've talked about so far are some key points regarding trauma-informed education from a paper published this year, Beyond Resilience, Facilitating Learning and Wellbeing in the Refugee Language Classroom. So we want to have a sensitive, safe space for learning where students aren't afraid to make mistakes. You want to be consistent and predictable as their lives have been so disrupted. We want to be empathetic of their challenges, responsive to their needs, yet firm with our boundaries to maintain that consistency and predictability. You want to respect privacy and different comfort levels. People have been asked regularly to share their stories in other settings, so let's not go there at all. If people want to not share that day or not share in speaking, but share something in writing, respect that. People might show up differently each time. Do make adjustments and be flexible. For example, in our IELTS mocks, I would allow students to take breaks. I wouldn't usually do that for regular students, but if it's the first time that they're doing an exam mock, I will let them do that, and I will, let them ask questions and so forth. Okay, make sure you've given them choices and a sense of control, something they really lack. So that's through doing their needs analysis, finding out the topics that they want covered. For example, we did business classes with some of our high-level students who were preparing to go to work. Help them feel similar to others, as we've mentioned. Foster autonomy and independence, so teaching them note-taking skills, teaching them where to find resources, and as well as that, any kind of accommodations that you're making, make sure everybody is being given that so that they feel, okay, I can take that accommodation if I need, but I'm not going to feel too different from someone else. Scaffold with small steps and realistic goals. So for example, if they're aiming to go for IELTS, that can seem like a very far away goal. So break it down. Okay, you want to improve speaking, try and have longer answers by using this phrase, for example, and giving reasons. Support emotion regulation strategies. So maybe they need breaks in the class. Maybe they need an activity to do that's going to be self-soothing. So I had one student who was knitting. You have a chair that you use for reflection time. Make learning relevant to real life, as we've mentioned, so it's not cognitively overloading them. And most of all, be positive and encourage hope. And we really thank everyone who shared messages for our students on the Padlet, and we'll be sharing that with them. Thank you so much. So please do check out this link in our post-webinar worksheet, and it's got an example needs analysis survey that kind of covers trauma-informed teaching. So we've got cognitive factors in terms of concentration and so on, affective factors, do students feel safe and calm in the class, and social cultural interactive factors, do they feel welcome and safe in the class? So this is something you can do to monitor the way that you're teaching this group of students. And so we are running out of time, so we're going to kind of adapt this last section. We wanted to share a little bit of our student work to end the session. So last year and this year, we had art competitions, poetry competitions, short story competitions. We trained students for public speaking and a child's book reading, which we'll use to finish the session. I think what I'm going to do is I'll put the links to this artwork and poems in the chat, and then after the session, you'll be able to check it out. So apologies to those who are on Facebook and can't get the link. But yeah, maybe you can take a screenshot and then check that out later. But for now, we'd like to move on to our child's reading.
So yeah, so this is just to give you an example of how we taught children reading through phonics and give you an insight into our transitions journey. So this is a book which was read by children last year on International Refugee Day, and the book is called Stitching Wishes. It's written for Afghanistan refugee community. I would request you to put up the volumes for now because it's an audio, and because it was live event, it's taken from the live event, it might be a little bit loud. So we'll play the story for you now, but please put up your audio volumes.
Life has not always been kind to me, but that has already passed. You are my focus, the future I see, and you're growing up so fast. I want only the best for you, but I don't have much to give. I want to prepare for this, all you will do. There's so much beauty I want you to live. I pray for you every single night. You bring me all the single nights, sending my wishes up to the stars, but I want wishes that you can hold tight, that you can take with you wherever you are. So I'll make a doll for you, my love, where every stitch is holding a wish. A doll I hope you'll be proud of. A doll you can have as you grow and flourish. As I hold the doll's body in my hand, fingers ready with needle and thread, and if you lace the first stitch, I hope you'll understand Mommy loves you from now on to the end. I begin at the bottom, starting with the feet, and I wish no matter where you go, that your feet will support you as your defense, all the battle that life will throw. Your legs, however, will take you far away from anything that is bad for you and bring you somewhere safe. I pray, where you can start over bright and new. As I move to the stomach, this is my wish that you will know to listen here too. For this is not just a place that you will nourish, but this is a place that you get feelings that can save you. The chest holds the heart, the most important piece, and I wish for yours to be kind, to send to the world only love and peace, to be passionate about the interests you want.
So because of time, we're going to stop it here. This full book is really beautiful. It's called Stitching Wishes. So we wish we could share the whole recording with you, but we wanted to have space for a couple of questions. So just to move to the end, we did want to share some quotes from our students. We'll let you read that as they pop up.
Thank you so much, Bea and Reena. Yeah, that was such a beautiful recording. We loved it so much. Yeah, you could put the quotes from your students on the screen, and let's take a couple of minutes to look for questions. But first of all, thank you so much for the presentation and the honesty and all the work that you've put in. It's absolutely fantastic. That's reflected in all the wonderful comments from our viewers on social media and from everyone who's watching us here in Zoom. We've got time for just a couple of questions. Is that okay with you?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
No problem. So we've got lots of questions here, and someone's interested in how you involve parents, and they're interested to learn that you involve parents. And they say, what's the response like? And do you see that there's benefits when the parents participate?
I'll take that question. So yes, so when we do the parents training, the parents at the beginning do not really understand why they're doing this. And they're not very motivated to come into the training, but the fact that they have to drop their children there and they need somewhere to wait. So they just go and sit down there, and at times, so how we get them started is we tell them it's your time off from your child. Don't worry about your child at this hour, because remember, these children are not going to school. So they are with their parents all day, 24/7. So they start looking at it, and then, first time the volunteer trainer would just have a general chat with them, or, get them some coffee and biscuits. Slowly through the chats, we break the way and we get them into it. Like, oh, how about we try this? We just always sit and talk. It takes time, but they do get engaged and they start. It's a long journey. It doesn't happen in 3-4 weeks. It takes good 6 to 7 months for them to understand, and then they start responding, and then they are more active when they come in and they look forward. Oh, what are we learning today? What are we doing today? So it takes time, but it depends how you unfold that session. I mean, we just can't take them in a room and say, all right, let's start doing craft activity. We just kind of slowly build that relationship with them, and then we get started, and then they get engaged.
It's really interesting. I've also got a question from someone on Facebook, and they ask, how do you place the learners? Do you test them all before, or is everyone welcome in these classrooms? I suppose this is more about adults than the young learners.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So we do have a level test where we assess their grammar and vocabulary in a written test. And then from that, we also complement that with speaking tests. But one thing that we find is that students vary hugely in terms of their skills, all 4 skills. And so it can be actually really hard to place them in a category. And so, yeah, again, some kind of flexibility is needed. And yeah, I do think teachers do need to be quite adaptable and expect a lot of variation, because students have so many different things going on and so many different experiences. And I do think it is very important to still do some kind of test though and of their progress, and this can also help them if they're joining classes from previous years, have taken a break. We don't know if their level has changed or increased or decreased in some way. So yeah, I think it's still an important thing to do, but just be aware that it's not easy to place them. Yeah.
Flexibility is my one big takeaway from everything that you've said today, to learn to be flexible, and don't know what's going to happen. Everyone, we have run out of time today, so thank you again so much, Bea and Reena. Thank you for all the wonderful participation. Thanks to Paul for moderating here, and thanks to Marcus and the team for moderating on Facebook. And this was number 2 of 4 webinars today. So take a 15-minute break and then come back for webinar number 3, which is LGBTQIA+ in ELT, Resisting Invisibility, with Peter Fuliger, who's joining us from the UK. So I hope to see you soon for that. Thanks everyone, and speak soon.